Hello everyone, and welcome to Solomon's Cave. The topic of this video is the book of Genesis, and to get right into it, let's start with the title and what it means. Before we look at the English title of Genesis, let us first look at the Hebrew title, which is Bereshit. Bereshit is the first word of the book, which was a common way of giving titles to books back in ancient times, and it means in the beginning. Later, the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, and several books got new Greek titles, including this one. And the Greek title for this book was Genesis. And in Greek, Genesis means origin or generation. Oh, and spoiler alert, we will see this word again real soon. As for the structure of Genesis, Genesis is one of the few books in the Bible that has a very clear structure that can be easily followed, even in English translations. The author of Genesis used a special expression to show where one section ended and another began. And that expression is, "These are the generations." The first of these expressions is found in Genesis 2 verse 4, where it reads, "These are the generations of the heavens and the earth." This is in part a summary of the creation of the heavens and the earth in chapter 1, but it is also an introduction for what follows, namely, the creation of Adam and Eve, the fall, and the story of Cain and Abel. The second expression is found in Genesis 5 verse 1, and it reads, "This is the book of the generations of Adam," and what follows is a list of Adam's descendants. Then in Genesis 6 verse 9 we start the generations of Noah, which focuses on the flood story. The generations of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the three sons of Noah, focuses on the so-called Table of Nations and the Tower of Babel. And in 11:10 we find the generations of Shem, which is another list of descendants, this time of, you guessed it, Shem. In 11:27 we begin the generations of Terah, which introduces the life of Abram, or later, Abraham. The list of the descendants of Ishmael starts in 25:12, and the lives of Isaac and Jacob start in 25:19, and are introduced as the generations of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Esau, or Edom, gets a double introduction for his genealogy in 36:1 and verse 9. And the final time this phrase shows up is in 37 verse 2, where it reads, "These are the generations of Jacob," and that section focuses on Joseph. Now let's take a closer look at the phrase, "These are the generations." In the original Hebrew, this phrase is Ele Toledot. But in the previously mentioned ancient Greek translation of the text, this phrase is translated as Hautai Dahai Genesis. And yep, exactly, that is Genesis. That is where the name of this book comes from. It comes directly from the structure of the book of Genesis. And then there is something else that is interesting about this phrase. And for that we have to go to Genesis 5 verse 1, where the second occurrence of this phrase reads as follows. "This is the book of the generations of Adam." And remember, the word generations in the Greek translation is Genesis, or Genesis. Now let's compare this phrase with the first verse in the Gospel of Matthew, the book of the generations of Jesus. This way, Matthew clearly wants to make a link between the life of Jesus and the book of Genesis. And to emphasize that this is not an accidental similarity, the word book is repeated here as well. As for the content of Genesis, the book can be easily divided in two main parts. The first part consists of the first 11 chapters, and this deals with the history of the whole world. From creation to Adam and Eve in the garden, then the fall, or the original sin, followed by the story of Cain and Abel. Then there is the story of the flood of Noah, and finally the Tower of Babel. In between those stories, you can also find two genealogies and the so-called Table of Nations. This Table of Nations gives us an overview of where the nations surrounding ancient Israel came from, which is kind of like a geography lesson and a history lesson combined. The second part covers the rest of the book, namely chapters 12 through 50. and it focuses on 4 generations of people, namely Abram, later called Abraham, Isaac, Jacob would later become known as Israel, and finally Joseph. This second part of Genesis contains a lot of material, so I'll just be focusing on some of the highlights. It starts off with one of the most important episodes in the whole Bible, namely the Call of Abram, where God promised Abraham to make his offspring into a great nation and to give them the land of Canaan. It then follows the rest of Abram's life and details his short visits to Egypt and the land of the Philistines, the separation from his nephew Lot, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the birth of his oldest son Ishmael by his concubine Hagar, the birth of his second son Isaac, this time by his wife Sarah, the near sacrifice of Isaac, followed by the arranged marriage between Isaac and Rebekah. Then the focus shifts briefly to Ishmael's offspring, before returning to talk about the life of Isaac, including the birth of the twin brothers Jacob and Esau. The story then follows Jacob, who deceives both his brother and his father to obtain his father's blessing, after which he is forced to flee abroad to his uncle Laban. There he marries Rachel and Leah, 2 of his cousins, and he gets 2 concubines as well. In total he would get 13 children by these 4 women. On his way back to the land of Canaan, he meets a mysterious man and wrestles with him as he tries to cross the Jabbok River. Then, after a brief overview of Esau's offspring, the story focuses on Joseph, Jacob's favorite son. Joseph's jealous brothers sell him into slavery, after which he ends up in Egypt. In Egypt, Joseph first rises through the ranks, but after a false accusation he ends up in prison. However, God has given him the gift of understanding dreams, which ultimately leads to his rise to become the second most powerful person in the whole country. Then there is a famine in the land, and the famine drives Joseph's brothers to buy grain in Egypt. Joseph tests his brothers to see if they are now better men. When it turns out that they are, he invites his whole family, including his very old father Jacob, to come and live in the province of Goshen in the land of Egypt. The book of Genesis ends with the blessing Jacob gives to his 12 sons, followed by his death, and then the death of Joseph. As you can see, this book has many famous stories that have become part and parcel of the Western culture. Even if you have never opened a Bible and have never gone to church in your entire life, you still know about Cain and Abel, Noah's flood, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the near sacrifice of Isaac, and the story of Joseph. And if you have gone to Sunday school, you probably remember even more. But now the question, what does it all mean? And why did anyone write this book? And why did the ancient Jews think this book was so important that they designated it among their most sacred writings? There are obviously many answers to that, since no one who writes a book with more than 32,000 words has only one purpose. But here are 3 of my suggestions to summarize the meaning of Genesis. First of all, it introduces God. If you look at the Bible as a novel, you will clearly see that God is the protagonist of the Bible. The first 11 chapters show that the God of Israel is the only God who created the whole world by himself, and that in the beginning all people knew about this God. This is a bold and pretty much unique claim in the ancient Near Eastern context. And the significance of this theological conviction will become important in several other books found later in the Bible. And it also laid the foundation for the universal spread of Christianity later. Second, it explains why God chose Israel. The call to Abraham in chapter 12 and the promises God makes to him at the beginning of the second part of Genesis lay the foundation for the belief that Israel is special, and that they have a special connection with this God, a covenant or a treaty. Most theologians rank this among the most important paragraphs in the whole Bible, for it is precisely here that the grand claim of God being the creator of the universe is connected to the special story of only one particular people. Third, it explains who Israel is. The narratives of the patriarchs explain the origin and identity of the people of Israel. It explains why they have 12 tribes, why they often call their God, quote, the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and why they believe God chose them, of all people, to lead out of slavery from Egypt. And it explains why they were in Egypt in the first place. And where Genesis ends, namely with Israel in Egypt, is precisely where the next book of the Bible picks up. If you like this video, please like, share and subscribe for more content.